Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to analyze my round 5 game from Gradište and I have to say I was preparing for this game seriously. I was playing a Croatian national master, Tereza Dejanovic, rated 1834 FIDE and more than 2000 national, so it was a serious game. Had the black pieces and I was going to play the Caro-Kann, of course. Saw that she played the exchange variation, so for the afternoon before the game, because I had a round in the morning, finished at around 1 or 2 p.m. I had about 2 hours to prepare. So I was looking for interesting variations. I saw several games of hers in the exchange variation, and I found something that I wanted to play. And previously, as you could see in the PDFs I've been sending out for my training routine to patrons, I've prepared one move against Queen b3, as you're going to see, but for the game I prepared something different. So we have e4, c6, d4, d5, ed5, cd5. Sorry, let me just reduce the volume. Bishop d3, knight c6. Some people make a mistake of playing c3 first, in which case black can play bishop f5 and be slightly better. So bishop d3 is the most precise move. Knight c6 attacking the d4 pawn. c3, knight f6, bishop f4. And now, as you can see, the main problem black has is that both of white bishops are much better than both of black's bishops. So there's a few strategies to combat that, and I decided to go for the main line. So bishop g4, attacking the queen has to go to b3. And now obviously black has problems with the b7 pawn. There are several moves that can be played here. One of them is e5, allowing the capture. This is, according to the engine, one of the best moves. I was recently preparing the move knight h5, forcing the bishop back to e3. And this is the position which I liked and which I thought I was going to play. I've prepared a lot for this move and the variation is fairly tricky. But in preparation for this game I found something else that the engine hates, but I didn't know what white can do against it. So after queen b3 I played what is the main move, queen c8. Simply defending my pawn. Queen d7 is also possible. The difference is that I couldn't implement the plan that I wanted to play. The deficit is that my rook cannot go to c8 easily, but this was all part of my plan. After knight d2, which is the best move, of course, the immediate knight f3 would lead to bishop f3, gf3. I play e6, knight g2, f3 now, and now the move that I had prepared, and I only saw it half an hour before the game, so I didn't have time for a detailed analysis. But in all the variations which the engine hated, I couldn't see what white can do. And I was very happy to play this move and to have it on the board. It's pretty much inevitable after bishop g4, queen b3 has to be played, and then the variation is fairly simple. I get to play the move anyway. So knight d7. And the point of knight d7 is twofold. Firstly, white cannot go forward with his main plan. That's the whole point of the variation. One of the main patterns in the exchange Caro-Kann is for the white knight to jump into e5. And as you can see, for the moment that's pretty bad, because I would take twice. White would stay with the pawn on e5, couldn't use the e5 square. That's the first thing. The second thing is that in many variations, since my bishop cannot go to d6, since my queen is now on c8, my bishop is going to have to go to e7. And then from e7, it can often go to f6, where my knight isn't in the way. There's a third benefit. The point is that when pressure on the queen side comes, my knight can get to b6 and then can get to c4. Usually in these type of structures, which you get for black in the exchange Caro-Kann and for white in the queen's gambit, black here is going to go for the minority attack, white in the queen's gambit is going to go for the minority attack. So one of the main plans is a6, b5, rook b8, and trying to play for b4, undermining the c3 pawn, takes, and then I'm going to have a weakness on c3, which I'm going to exploit with knight a5, knight c4, and obviously if my other knight gets to b6, then I'm going to have double control of the c4 square. So that's the sort of in-depth idea of knight d7. So I was very happy to see this move and to play this move. Once again, the engines hate it. If I turn on the engine now, it's going to say that white is better. But from a human perspective, this advantage of more than +1 is completely unjustified in my opinion, and I think it's really hard to play for white. So she continued with castles, which I expected, bishop e7, which I had prepared, queen c2, which I Well, it's a common plan to put pressure on the h7 pawn, and I expected that as well. Now there are some tricks with knight to b5. For the moment, it's defended because the bishop is defending the queen, so knight b5 would be met by cb5, queen takes queen, bishop takes queen, losing a piece. But very often in positions like these, the rook is going to be on c8, so it is going to work. And now obviously I cannot castle, so I played what I think is the best move, bishop h5. Preparing to play bishop g6. I obviously want to trade the d3 bishop for my h5 bishop because it has served its purpose. The main idea in the exchange Caro-Kann is to trade this bishop off because you have a pawn structure on the light squares. Rook a to e1, which I think was her first mistake. You obviously want your f rook on the e file, you want your a rook on the queen side, which happened very early on, as you are going to see that this was a mistake. It became obvious. Bishop g6, and now she played her second mistake, a3. a3 is a complete waste of time because the move does nothing. We spoke after the game and analyzed the game. She wanted to prevent knight b5, which is not a threat. For the moment, though, it can be a threat because after knight b5, c takes b5, queen takes queen, bishop takes queen, bishop takes bishop is a threat. But then again, I think she, instead of a3, should have simply played bishop takes g6. And after bishop takes g6, h takes g6, I think she would have had a better position. a3 is a waste of time. So after a3, I castled. And now she captured. Obviously, it would have been much better to capture on the last move because black wouldn't have been able to castle just yet. And the pawn is actually better on a2. And here she played queen to d3. And now I got scared of some ideas of knight g4 and queen h3, looking at my h7 square. So I wanted to parry that, and I wanted to play rook c8 because the knight has served its purpose. This diagonal is open, e5 is protected, so now I want to control the g5 square, which I thought was crucial, so I played the move queen d8. And after queen d8, I was extremely happy with my position. I have everything I want. I'm preventing any piece from coming to g4. I'm opening up the c file for my rook, and my next plan is, as stated, going to be knight a5, knight c4, and in some positions a6, b5 as well. Here she played h3, which I didn't like either. I think that's a time-wasting move. I was actually looking at the move queen e3 to try and reinforce the threat of knight g4, in which case the square would be controlled twice and they wouldn't be able to take. Of course, f6 is never an option because e6 is weak. But after h3, which I think is a waste of tempo, I played rook c8. And now she played another mistake, queen b5. And after queen b5, black is strategically winning. Regardless of what the engines say, it's much easier to play black here because black is going forward with his own plans. And white doesn't really have a plan in this game. Of course, I have to trade the queens off. So queen b6, queen takes, knight takes. And now if you look at the position, since the a pawn has been moved to a2, it's now to a3. It's now really hard to control the queen side. I have tons of weaknesses to exploit. So now my next move is going to be simply knight a4, and it's going to be hard for her to defend the queen side. She tried to parry that with knight e5, and I'm happy to exchange my c6 knights, definitely. So knight takes c5, bishop takes e5, and I play bishop f6 because I want to trade off my last bad piece. There's nothing for her to do. I was looking at positions with bishop d6, rook e8, and bishop b4, trying to defend the queen side. But soon enough, I think this would be too risky, even though she does defend the c3 square. So this would enable her, after knight a4, to play rook b1 and then play rook c1 and then play b3. So I thought this was a resilient try, but it's obviously risky because of a5. So after bishop f6, she has to take bishop f6, gf6, and now I got everything I wanted. Here I was convinced I was going to win, and I knew that I had a really easy queenside game. I have the semi-open file, I have the more active pieces on the queen side, I've restricted her pieces from entering the e5 square, and I have absolutely no weaknesses in my position. She continued with f4, which doesn't really do much. f5 can just be captured. I might even capture with the e-pawn. So I continued with knight a4, putting pressure on her position. She has to defend if b3, knight c3, so rook b1, and now rook c6, piling up the pressure, rook f to c1, rook f to c8. And now you can already see that my knight and my rooks are more active than her pieces, and she is in dire straits already. She played king f2, king g7, improving my king e3, and now I played g5, which I thought was the best move. I don't really want to capture, that's not the point of the variation. The point is that in many positions, some of her pawns are going to be hanging, and that if she ever takes, I'm going to undouble my pawns and march my king up the board. I can also, in this case, play rook c to h1 and try to provoke weaknesses with g4. And if she captures, I have the h file. If she allows me to capture, I'm going to play rook h8 and have a weakness to exploit. She continued with rook c2. And I played b5. This is an anti-positional move, giving away the c5 square, but for the moment it's really hard to exploit. She immediately continued with knight b3, which I didn't like, because knight a5 isn't a threat. I'm just going to play rook c7. And knight b3 is actually a tactical liability, because in many positions, not here, but in many positions, if she moves her rooks, then I'm going to have a tactical threat of knight takes a2, and after rook takes, check here, check, and you can see that if the rook weren't on b2, then I'm going to win the knight. So this was sort of a threat throughout the game, for the rest of the game, and she now constantly has to be on the lookout for knight takes b2 or knight takes c3, and yeah, she's going to be in trouble if she isn't careful. So I continued with king g6, just improving my king. I thought this was a very sensible move, and now she went for doubling on the f file. In this position, knight takes c3 doesn't work because the rook still defends the b3 knight. So knight c3, b3, rook c3 check wouldn't work. So I played rook e8, and now I'm going to push my pawn break e5 and basically have a much better central position, a much better knight, and both of my rooks are better. Here she took fg5 in order to be able to double her rooks, and I played the move f5. And now her position is hard to play. We did a lot of analysis on this position. Even a grandmaster joined us and tried to analyze. We concluded that white is fine with correct play, but it's really hard to find correct play. I think that one of the best moves should be king d3, and then try to double the rooks on the d file. I'm going to play e5, pawn takes, rook takes, and now king to d4 would be too risky, I think, because I would be able to double my rooks, and I don't think she has much in the position. But simply rook to e2 should be enough. And now if I try to double, she's just going to play rook to f2, challenging the e file, and this should be equal. However, after f5, it's really hard to find this idea, and she continued with the very weak knight c1, and now her position is already much worse. I obviously have a weakness on b2 to exploit. I'm going to play e5 very soon, but before I play e5, I have an even better move, f4 check. And now I'm forcing her king to make a decision, and the problem with the immediate e5 is rook takes f5, obviously, so f4 gets rid of that. And now I was calculating the move king d3, which I thought was the best option, e5, d5, rook e5. And now even king here might work, doubling up my rooks. And her king is in the mating net at some point, but this should be survivable. But instead of that, she can once again simply play rook to e2. And after I double, she can challenge the file. And now obviously I have weaknesses, which I'm going to have to defend. Her king can enter the d4 square, and this should have been a much better defense. Instead of that, after f4 check, she just played a bad move. She played king f3, which is much worse. And now obviously after e5, d5, rook e5, she cannot attack my rook. She can still challenge the e file and still be fine, but worse than in the previous variation. But unfortunately for her, she just played the losing blunder, and I think that it's now game over. Even here after f3, if she tries to challenge my rook, then I can simply take on b2, and should be much better. Regardless of the knight coming into the position, I can still defend everything, and I think that here this would be the worst case scenario. yeah, this loses tactically because of a6, but in some cases she could have had an almost survivable position, but instead of that she went for king g4, and now the position is losing. The position is just over after rook e6. I'm threatening checkmate. She needs to do something. She was counting on the move h4, but obviously h4 fails because of checkmate once again. So she is forced to play rook f3, and after I take, she takes. I play knight takes b2, and this is now game over. She continued the position with knight e2, and now if you want you can pause the video, but it's black to play and win. One move after which she resigned. It's not hard to find, you are just exploiting the position of the king and the rook. Okay, so the move is knight c4. After knight c4, I'm threatening checkmate with knight e5, and that's really hard to meet. If she moves the rook, then it's going to be checkmate. If she doesn't move the rook, then I'm going to take the exchange. Once again, she was banking on the move h4, but now I simply play king e5. And once the king moves, takes, and this is just over. She would have to resign here, and so after king c4, after knight c4, she gave up. And I want to come back to the position with knight d7, which I played, which the engine hates. As you can see, it's 1.3. But since you are taking away the main plans of your opponent, then the position becomes much easier to play for you. And obviously we've both played the Exchange Caro-Kann a lot of times, because that's her main attack against the Caro-Kann, and I faced it a lot. And she never saw this move. I never saw it before either, but I think it's a great new idea. Despite being worse according to the engines, I think it's really hard to meet, and I did about 10 hours of analysis on the move after I came back from the tournament. I think it's actually a viable option. I don't really see a refutation yet. If you play the Exchange Caro-Kann, if you play the exchange variation against the Caro-Kann, I would really appreciate your input on this, and what you would play, what plan you would have. And let me know so that we can improve in this position. For now, I think that knight d7 is a viable move. Okay, I'm going to be sending further analysis to the patrons. As always, if you would like extra content and if you would like to support the channel, visit the link in the description below. And thank you very much. Let me know what you think of the game, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye. Thank you.